A quick note today, this episode contains discussion of suicide and mental health issues. From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. For the past 7 years, if you were a Colorado farmer who was struggling and felt overwhelmed, you had a place to turn for help. The AgWell program offered mental health support to farmers and ranchers in several Western states. It gave them stress management tools and support from their peers. That's important because farmers statistically struggle with isolation and die by suicide at least twice as often as the general population. But those services are on hold now. Amid other spending cuts ordered by the Trump administration, the U.S. Department of Agriculture in April froze $10 million in funding for support programs like AgWell. Tracy Ross, a reporter with the Colorado Sun, recently wrote about the program and the abrupt cancellation of its funding.
Farmers and ranchers, so all producers, carry these really high levels of stress because of the instabilities that they face. Finances, carrying the pressure of multi-generational farm lineage, injury, acute illness, adverse weather, and climate change are all things that are out of their power, but affect them really strongly. And so it really increases their feelings of pressure. And when things go wrong, there's sort of this compounding effect that really leads to some serious mental health issues in some of them.
Tracy, you interviewed Dan Waldvogel, a rancher from southwestern Colorado who founded AgWell in 2018. He had a really deep personal connection with this issue that led him to create the program. What happened in Dan's community?
Yeah, that was a really interesting story. So Waldvogel was living in southern Colorado. He was working on a ranch in the very close vicinity of this ranch where he was working. In a matter of months, 4 ranchers died by suicide. And so as he described it, he said, one of the individuals moved cows up in the high country near them. Another one, he was his mentor. It was a beginning farmer. Another was an old-timer that was probably a 6th-generation rancher who lived upriver. And then it just definitely heightened his awareness of the issue, while at the same time he was going through some issues. So that's what led him to start thinking about this as a larger problem within the producer community, and he started AgWell.
One interesting thing about AgWell is they give farmers and ranchers these cards that they can hand to a friend who's having a hard time. What's on these cards and why is that approach effective?
Yeah, so this is a great story. And this came from another producer that I talked to, Danny Wood, who lives out on the Eastern Plains near the town of Peets. And he actually talked to me from his combine while he was out in his fields and explained what these cards are. And they're basically these little sort of business card sized cards that have like a number for people to call when they're experiencing a need for a professional to talk to about a certain mental health issue. And the cool thing about it is that they're completely anonymous. So this Danny Wood carries around a bunch of these in his pocket. And when something happens, when he has an interaction with somebody who expresses that they're having a mental health problem or issue or concern, he'll give him one of these cards. And sometimes the people will ask if they want him to know how their talk went with the professional or what they're going through. And he will say, no, that is none of my business. I don't want to know anything about it. That's for you. That's for you to do privately and for your help alone. So it's just this really incredible, simple tool that has been created that's so obvious in some ways, but so exceptionally impactful.
I also find it really interesting that AgWell sets up a lot of casual get-togethers, things like pizza nights and Zoom calls. Why is this as much of a focus as, say, getting people to make an appointment with a mental health counselor?
Well, I think I talked to Waldvogel about this, and he said that, they don't have a bunch of data for how these cards and how these phone calls and conversations help producers, but they do have little gatherings like these pizza for producers, where they will buy pizzas and invite producers to come out and just talk and build a connection with their neighbors while sharing some of the information of this is what you need to look for in yourself and your neighbors to make sure that people are okay and they're not acting like they have something going on that maybe they don't want to talk about. So they just create these really casual gatherings that are sort of a door opening to support that maybe isn't so formal.
Sure. It's sort of safe to get together for pizza.
Yeah, definitely.
Briefly, Tracy, how much federal funding does AgWell receive in Colorado every year?
Well, it's pretty interesting. They only get $100,000 to $160,000 a year. And that's not just Colorado. That's for Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico. But that funding really does help counter the stresses of farming and ranching. And, those are some of the things that contribute to mental health challenges and the statistically higher rates of suicide.
And just so I'm clear, are these cuts by the Trump administration as opposed to the funding for the program simply expiring or something like that?
They're definitely from the Trump administration, and they came through the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the new Secretary Burke Rollins.
Now, you mentioned earlier speaking with a farmer named Danny Wood, who was literally out in his fields when you talked. How is he feeling about the funding freeze?
It hits him really, really hard because the way he described it is those producers out there, at least in his area, are in a pretty dire situation right now. I mean, he described what he was seeing from his combine. He said, I'm out in my fields. It's so dry. We're in such a drought. It's stressful. He talked about the economy being stressful. He said it's been hard for people to get their operating lines of credit renewed this year. And he said that he's lost money for the last 3 years. So there's that added stress. So I think for him, he just has this very personal connection because he lives in that world and he knows why this stuff is so important.
Now, you've spoken with the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union and the Colorado Department of Agriculture about the funding cut. Tracy, how optimistic is the Farmers Union that the Trump administration would reverse this decision and restore the funding?
I do not think they're very optimistic at all. I mean, that was the tone that I got. And, sort of the way that Chad Franke talked about it. He's the director. He said they just don't know. And they actually can't believe that this has been cut because they feel like if the Trump administration, if the people who had been doing the cuts knew the impact and the value of this program, it wouldn't have happened. So they just have the feeling that there was sort of this kind of slash and burn going with cutting programs that seemed like they were, part of the slush fund or whatever. And
sure,
if they had known, exactly what those programs do, that might not have happened.
Tracy Ross of the Colorado Sun reported on the AgWell program and the cancellation of its funding by the Trump administration. The program offered mental health support to farmers and ranchers. Tracy mentioned the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union is looking for other funding sources to possibly continue the program. We'll put a link to Tracy's story in our show notes and at KUNC.org. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.